Hey guys, what's happening? So, I was reading Symbiote Spider-Man, which is like a still ongoing series, but I was like, man, we gotta talk about this. Because much like Venom First Host, this narrative is going back and telling a new story around the history of Peter Parker and the Venom symbiote, which reminds me a lot of Venom First Host, but I think I might like this one a little bit more. So let's get into it, because I like to know you guys' thoughts as well. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so you can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so first and foremost, just setting the stage of where Symbiote Spider-Man really just kicks off, it takes place not long after the narrative of like your 1984-1985 Secret Wars. And I mean like very close to the conclusion of that event. And I mean like days, maybe weeks, but really from just the way that it starts, it feels like less than a month. But of course, as I'm sure most of you already know, and you know, just to help out those who may not know, who are probably like those 3 people in the back scared to raise their hand, I wanted to just give you a quick rundown of why the Secret Wars was so significant at this point in the case of Peter Parker coming across this suit, and in addition to that, after getting it, he was a very different version of Spider-Man for a short while in comparison to the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that we had got prior to Secret Wars at that point. But in a nutshell, with the events that had taken place in your 1984 Secret Wars, Peter Parker's suit was damaged, and after Peter had seen Thor's cape and helmet had been restored, and Thor was like, oh, there's a machine in there, just go in there, think of what you need, it'll give it to you. Which is crazy, because imagine if Thor had originally got the symbiote. But then again, what's even crazier, because I'm not sure if Donny Cates had did this intentionally in his recent run of Venom, which gives us a new history between Thor and the symbiotes, because I'm pretty sure he brought Thor into the Venom mythology because of how close he is with Jason Aaron, but I have no clue if he was even thinking of how significant that narrative is to why Thor didn't get the symbiote in this case. But either way, before I go too deep into that, I just thought it was pretty cool. But back in the 80s, this is how Spider-Man had originally got the symbiote, and at the time he just thought it was alien technology, something super high tech versus an actual living alien parasite. And not long after, he did eventually realize that it's not like a programmable suit, but rather that it was a living symbiote that desired to be bonded with him permanently. And this symbiotic relationship just held a lot more baggage and consequences than what he was ready for. And Symbiote Spider-Man just explores so much more of that. And so now the way that this starts off, we just pick up with Mysterio, who has gotten the brakes beaten off of him by Spider-Man. And he's roughed up pretty bad, man. But this gives into the ideal of 2 different things. And the first, which is way more significant in this particular instance, is the fact that with this symbiote at this time, this is a much more rougher Spider-Man. Because on one hand, yes, he's still the hero and his main objective is to take down the villain, but on the other hand, in most cases, and pretty much, I don't want to say every case, but in a lot of cases, Spider-Man went too far. Like there was a whole lot of unnecessary roughness. And so like just as a quick example, back in Peter Parker and the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 110, like this is one of my favorite examples because Spider-Man and Daredevil go at it. And this had took place back towards the conclusion of the murder of Jean DeWolf, or the death of Jean DeWolf, I think the series is called. But back at this time when Spider-Man had caught up with Stan Carter, who was a New York City detective who had the alternate identity of a self-proclaimed vigilante named Sin Eater, which was pretty much how he would just justify his self-righteous acts of serving judgment on people who he deemed to be sentenced to death as punishment for their sins. And so when Peter gets here just in time to save Betty Brant, he beats the brakes off of Carter, and mainly in this case for what he's done to Jean, but he goes in and like overboard well after Carter gives up, and more so just making him suffer rather than just turning him in. And at the time, this is what caused Daredevil to get involved because he probably heard a grown man screaming from blocks away. But at this time, with Daredevil stepping in, he was one of the first people to call out that this wasn't your regular Spider-Man, because Spider-Man was way too brutal, over cocky. Like when Daredevil threw one of his sticks and Spider-Man caught it, he's like, my spider senses sense anything. And Daredevil was like, yeah, but not everything, and just bust him in the back of the head with the other one. But I'd have to say my most memorable moment from this classic issue, it would have to be when Daredevil told Spider-Man, you're no different from Stan Carter, and Spider-Man's like, we're not the same, big difference. And Daredevil replied, well, not in my eyes. And when I first seen this, I was like, is anybody anything in your eyes? But either way, with Mysterio, we see the very same thing, because even before getting the symbiote, Mysterio would always lose to Spider-Man, and with the symbiote, he would still lose to Spider-Man, but with the addition of the butt kicking and the we're not done here speech. And it's crazy with Spider-Man knocking him all over the place, and you see like the chameleon mask over one side, the jack-o'-lantern reference on the next side, and even your reference to Spot kind of slipped in there as well. But from here, we jump over to a conversation between Quentin Beck, Mysterio, and Jonathan Owen, who would later be Spot, who had just having a casual conversation to where Jonathan is pretty much telling Quentin, like, I hear what you're saying about this whole supervillain thing, but you kinda suck at it, because every time you go against Spider-Man, you lose embarrassingly. And he's like, dude, the power pack could even beat you, which really is also a thing that actually happened. And the power pack, like, those are like children. But in this conversation with Quentin meeting with Jonathan, and more so for the attempt of soliciting his help, and mainly because at this point in time they're friends, and Jonathan also has his own resources, being that he works for Wilson Fisk. But in this conversation, he tells Jonathan that rather he has the plans of robbing a bank, and Jonathan's like, okay, well now you're aiming too low. But Jonathan declines his offer, and he's just like, good luck with that, I wish you the best. And so now getting into how this robbery actually goes down, we get to see a bit more of the reasons why Mysterio isn't as successful as he could be given his method of execution. Because the way that he did this, he had a box delivered to one of the tellers, which had a gas mask with a note saying put this on, so when he released the knockout gas, she would be the only one conscious, and she would be able to just walk him right into the vault, which in theory is a solid plan. But what Mysterio did not account for was the fact that during this time, the security guard was actually using the bathroom, and as a result, he wasn't affected by the knockout gas. And when the security guard told him to freeze and Mysterio didn't comply, the guard takes his shot only to find out that it was an illusion when Mysterio pops up behind him and takes him out. But in front of him, the Mysterio he shot through, when that image dissolves, we find out that the bank teller was right there in the line of fire. So at this point, not only could Mysterio not get in the vault, but now this innocent wife and mother, she's been killed and that blood is on his hands. But sometime later after this has taken place, and still not really like your current day, not by a stretch. And this we can mainly tell because with Spider-Man, who's stopping the Human Fly at this time from stealing the painting, like while this is going on, you can see Spider-Man jumping from like the Twin Towers, like one to the next, which not only gives us like a scope of the date, but also just this amazing view of these historical buildings which were still standing back at this time. But during this pursuit, which looks a lot like the boss fight from like the PS4 Spider-Man game, which I still haven't played, I'm not proud of that, and I only know that from like watching game footage online. But this matchup with the Human Fly doesn't go on for long because he quickly takes him out and he's able to take the painting back from where the Human Fly stole it. But it's after this that we start to get a sense of how close this new retelling of this narrative takes place in relation to Secret Wars, because we see J. Jonah Jameson talking about it on the news and really not holding back his feelings on how the Avengers are not really disclosing information about it, and that information mainly being Spider-Man's involvement with Secret Wars, even though he just saved the famous Norwegian screen painting. And it's like J. Jonah's like, forget the screen painting, I need to know where Spider-Man is now and what is he doing. And so it's here where we get a bit of that same but different bit of history when Felicia Hardy, aka the Black Cat, comes through his window, because unlike the original source material, this time she comes through without her costume, of which she explains doing so mainly because Peter asked her not to so wouldn't give up his secret identity. But nonetheless, I like how Felicia's included within this narrative because at the time they were in a relationship, and this was really like the first time that she had seen him put on the symbiote, which she thought was amazing but a bit weird at the same time. And she was like, is that thing alive? And Peter's like, no, it's just alien technology. And she's like, okay, well, alien technology that reads your mind, generates its own webbing, just crawls across the room and wraps around your body. That thing's alive. You can't tell me that thing ain't alive. Like, for real. But it's from here that Peter takes Felicia to go visit Uncle Ben's gravesite, with this day being the anniversary of the day that he passed, and Peter also attempting to let Felicia get to know Peter a bit better. But it's not long after they're here that Peter gets spooked when he also sees Quentin Beck at the same cemetery, and it's then that it's triggered in his mind like, wait a minute, that's Quentin Beck. Quentin Beck is Mysterio, and Peter's just thinking, wait a minute, does Mysterio know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man? Which just causes him to dip out, leaving Felicia, who happens to just stick around only because Aunt May had just showed up. But as far as Quentin Beck and the reason why he's here at the cemetery, it's mainly because he's paying respects to Audrey Henning. And as it turns out, Audrey Henning was actually the young lady who had died in that botched robbery when Mysterio had attempted to rob the bank, placing her in the line of fire. And he really had just came here out of regret. But while he was here, the reason why he was staring at Peter and Felicia, it was mainly because when he had seen Felicia, for a brief moment he had thought she was Audrey. And of course this wasn't something that he like dwelled on or anything. He understood that it wasn't her, so he just went along about his business. But after leaving from there, later on that evening, Quentin suited up as Mysterio only because he had planned to announce his retirement from being a villain. And I'm not necessarily sure how that was going to go down, whether he was saying he's going to take his talents to South Beach or whatnot, but more or less at this point in time, he was just ready to say, I'm done, I'm ready to hang it up. But what we come come to find out is that this is actually the same opening encounter between Spider-Man and Mysterio when Peter shows up, and we hear the beginning of the conversation, because at this point Peter is asking Mysterio, why were you at that gravesite? Were you involved with that robbery? Better yet, I know you were involved with that robbery and you're responsible for the death of Audrey Henning. But the crazy thing is, during this time that Spider-Man's just like going in on him, Peter notices that his spider sense is not going off. And at this point in time, it's mainly because Mysterio was at a point of just giving up. But with him urging Mysterio to confess, that's why he was there, and really more so for his own comfort, so Peter would know that his identity was safe. But with him urging Mysterio to confess, this only led to Mysterio lying and saying that that was his sister. He was just mourning his sister, which was totally a lie, but it bought Mysterio enough time to reach for a detonator, blow up the lab, and create a distraction big enough for him to get out of there and not have Spider-Man take him in. But it's from here that we jump over to a guy by the name of Alan Jennings, who is an actor slash stunt actor who's also a mutant, but he's not really so much aware of it. But either way, dude is a total jerk. Like, he's actually punching people during scenes, getting kicked off the set, and it's here when he's approached by Mysterio. And when Mysterio approaches him, it's funny because he's like, I am Mysterio, and dude's like, who? You mean like Rey Mysterio? And speaking of which, man, back in the day around this time, like mid to late 90s, early 2000s, whatever, like I wasn't into wrestling like that, but there was a handful of people, like if I seen them, they had my attention. And just to name a few, it was Rey Mysterio, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Eddie Guerrero, may he rest in peace, and like dude's shoulders was insane. Oh, and speaking of shoulders, Goldberg was another one, and last but definitely not least, The Rock. Like, I never knew what The Rock was cooking, but I'd run to the TV just to find out. But Mysterio approaching Alan at this time, of course he tries to hit him with the razzle dazzle, like, no, I'm not Rey Mysterio, but I'm Mysterio, the arch nemesis of Spider-Man. But none of these effects really fool Alan because he works in the movie business as well, and he's pretty much like, man, you missed me with all that. But Mysterio's pretty much like, okay, look, I got a job for you. I just want you to kill Spider-Man. I understand that you're a mutant with nearly impenetrable skin, and I'm now giving you the opportunity to be well compensated for that talent by putting it to work. And Alan's like, first of all, I'm not a mutant, I'm not a freak. And Mysterio just spins that beautifully by telling Alan that, look, no, mutants are natural. Spider-Man, he's not. So for that reason, you're not the freak, he is. And so now at this point, Spider-Man, who is looking for Mysterio, and I almost said Rey Mysterio, but with Spider-Man looking for Mysterio to apologize, because at this point he still believes his story. He believes that Mysterio was there mourning his sister, because with Peter Parker, even though slightly off the rails, he still kind of knows that, hey, look, that was kind of messed up. But with looking for Mysterio and running across some green smoke, which attracts him to it, to which yet again, no spider sense going off, because Mysterio would just disappear and reappear in a different spot. And Spider-Man would just jump to each one like, look, let's just talk for a second. But so when Spider-Man runs up to like the third one, this time his spider sense goes off, and we find out that the reason why is that behind this illusion, there was actually Alan Jennings, who in my opinion is like the Luke Cage we never heard about, but he comes through swinging, but now he's going by the name Hard Rock. And I'm just thinking, Hard Rock, you mean like the cafe? And for the record, he didn't like the name either, but Mysterio was like, it's either that, you pick a name, or go by your government name so you can get arrested later on. And more or less, Mysterio's like, we ain't got all day for you to pick a name, so we're just gonna go with it. But it's not too long after fighting this guy that Spider-Man realizes that punching this dude is literally like punching Colossus. Like, it hurts to hit and to get hit. And like for Peter, throughout all of this, it's really hurting his pride. And mainly because he is seconds away from getting beaten up by a no-name villain who isn't on par with like your Doc Ock or your Kraven. But eventually, after knocking Spider-Man out, like right when he's getting ready to finish the job, the symbiote reacts and it protects Peter. And man, when I tell you it reacts, I mean that by it jumped into Hard Rock's mouth, went inside of him, and expanded from the inside, exploding his body. Like, I'm talking about Mortal Kombat 11 fatality style, which for the record made Mysterio throw up in his bowl. So he had to take it off and get some air. But it's here that we also find out that Mysterio was actually using one of the offices of Wilson Fisk, mainly because Spider-Man trashed his former headquarters, and Wilson Fisk was one of the first people he could think of who had as many monitors and cameras set up in place for him to utilize and just make it work. But it's also here where Jonathan walks outside taking his regular smoke break, and Quentin kind of tries to act surprised to see him, but we know that he knew that Jonathan worked here. But it's here where Quentin tells Jonathan that he understands that Wilson Fisk wants power over anything, and he believes that he's found that one thing that is the most powerful, which Wilson Fisk would want, but he's gonna need Jonathan's help to capture it. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And as for me, I'm just gonna let you know right now, I'm digging Symbiote Spider-Man, because much like First Host, I don't mind them playing with the history, mainly because so much of it is still grounded in the real events that happened. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.